support. And there isn't a person out there that doesn't want to be supported, that doesn't want to feel more secure, because the name of the game out there is basically feeling insecure, feeling scared, feeling fearful about the fact that you don't necessarily control life. And so there you are, you're this confident, smiling, heroic being, and you get up underneath the person and you come out of service. I'll never forget an incident that happened to me in Washington, D.C., where I was going into a seminar, and there was a young waiter there, and he just happened to come up to me and said, in the hotel, he said, "What is the secret of tips?" And I said to him, the secret of tips is to get underneath the customers, you know, to get underneath and really serve them. And he said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And I said, what I mean is that for the time it takes you to serve this person and to be with them, you'll subjugate your ego for their needs, absolutely. And so rather than coming out of like thought forms of, oh gosh, when does this shift end? And look at this guy, I really don't like the way he's dressed. And oh goodness me, he's asked me for some more peanuts. And oh goodness me, I'm rushing about. What you're doing is you're coming out of, how can I help you, sir? What can I do for you? You know, would you like ice? Would you like lemon? What would you like? You know, would you like it on this side of the glass or that side of the glass? You know, would you like another pillow, another cushion? What can I get for your lady wife? What would she like? You know, there isn't anything while you're in my care that I won't do for you, you know. You want me to take your canary for a walk while you're having a drink? No problems, you know. And I left this young waiter with this information about coming out of loving them and serving them. And I went off and did my seminar, and when I came back from the seminar, he came up to me and he says, "This is totally fantastic." He said, "I've never had a day like this ever in all the time that I've been a waiter here in this hotel. And the previous record for tips in one shift for me was $42, and in this particular shift I earned $160 in tips for the very first time." So this young man had quadrupled his tips by just serving. And isn't it true, as you go out there, you'll find mediocre restaurants, mediocre hotels, mediocre airlines, mediocre everything. You know, you walk in the door and they can't even be bothered with you. They're not organized. They're not interested in what you want. You know, and you get this feeling of like, hey, I'm not a customer, I'm not a person. And you don't buy, or you limit the amount you will buy. And you don't feel this expansion and this power inside of you. And so as each of you begin to look in terms of like developing a way of becoming independently wealthy or developing some kind of creativity so that it gives you more wealth, all you really have to do is serve. And serve is energy. And the people give you back another energy called money. And then you go spend that on the experiences you like, which is again energy. And I think that's vital, and that to me is the key. That there isn't anything more than just coming out of service, coming out of being organized. You know, and being organized is a simple thing. You just get organized. You get, hey, what do I need to make this business work? You know, what are my customers going to want? And when you can subjugate your ego and put yourself in the mind of the customers, in the mind of the people that are going to come to you, then it isn't a problem to figure out what they're going to want. They're going to want to be comfortable. They're going to want to do it quickly or reasonably quickly, whatever it is. They're going to want it to work. They're going to want to be able to have value for money. They may want more than one way of paying for it. But basically speaking, what do they want? And then if you begin to concentrate on making it clean and fresh and beautiful, people respond. And isn't it true that as you go out in the physical plane, most of it isn't clean, isn't fresh, doesn't work? You know, I mean, you turn the handle on the door and it comes away in your hand. You press the button in the elevator and it doesn't go anyplace. You put 50 cents in the Coke machine and no Coke comes out, you know? And the whole of the world is like that. This sort of, this only just working sort of syndrome, you know? And of course, if you move out of, say, America and you go to other places, you have even more experience of things not working, you know? So, for example, in England, whenever I travel there, I try to make all my international calls back to America before I actually leave America. Because trying to get an international operator on the English telephone system, forget it. You can grow old. You know, you can grow old. I've only met one or two people that ever actually got through, you know. And as you look at that, you can see how like so much of it doesn't work and so much of it isn't there to help you. Why is this money mastery thing so important to you? The reason it is because we're living at a critical time in the financial history of the world today. We're looking at a banking system here today in the United States where the liquidity of these banks is on average only 6%. In the era going up to 1929, the liquidity of the average American bank fell from like 20% to 12%. And that really, really concerned people. Today, our average American bank has a liquidity of just 6%, which means that 94% or 94 cents of your dollar is no longer in that bank. And the money, that 94 cents that isn't any longer there, has been lent out to all sorts of folk that may or may not give it back. After the oil crisis in the 70s and in the war in the Middle East, The sheer amount of money that poured into the American banking system and the big financial houses of Europe and so on, that money came pouring in, the greatest transfer of wealth in the history of mankind, and the banks had to lend it out. When a bank takes your money, when it takes your deposit, that's a liability for the bank. The minute they can give it to somebody, lend it to somebody, it becomes an asset in their books. And so there's a tremendous propensity for the banks to kind of get rid of this stuff. It's almost like this hot potato that they're trying to shove onto the next guy. And so when the oil prices went up, you know, in the 70s, these banks went out and they kind of gave the money to everybody, you know. They just dolloped it out and said, hey, you need some cash, take it. And all of the countries out there of the third world and the lesser developed countries and so on, they took that money and they spent it. And they spent it like crazy on all sorts of projects that may or may not have assisted the infrastructure of those countries. And now we're looking at a situation where it's tremendously difficult to get the money back from those countries. You know, America gave money to every nation in the world. I mean, just gave it. It gives it to its enemies. It gives it to its friends. Albania is the only country that America hasn't given any money to. And the only reason they haven't given any to Albania is because they can't find it. If they could find Albania, they'd give them some. You know, and so all of this money's gone out, and you can watch these third world countries struggling, trying to get it back. Mexico is an excellent example where they have a debt of up around close to $100 billion. And they get about $7 or $8 billion a year in oil revenues. So you can see that if they're only paying, let's say, 7 or 8% interest on their money, they need all of their oil revenues every year, forever and ever, in order just to service that debt. And what happened was that when oil fell recently, you know, tumbled down from its peak of $30, $35 a barrel, we got into a situation where the American people were literally wiring money down to Mexico so it could wire it back to the bank so that nobody would default. It's like you're getting billed as a common man, you're getting billed for something that's nothing to do with you. We have a situation where, for example, corporate debt in this country is at 50% of its total assets. And a lot of the assets that the corporation have are in the form of paper and notes and bonds that they're holding of other corporations. So the 50% that you think they've got, some of that may be real money and it may not be real money. The government has basically continued to print money like crazy in order to try to keep the system up. After 1946, all the major trading nations agreed to come off the gold standard, which meant that all of a sudden money didn't have to be real anymore, because in the olden days, a dollar bill was a receipt for some gold someplace. And in theory, you could walk up and you could say, hey, you know, I want my gold, you know, or I want to look at my dollar bill, or whatever it is you do when you go around the bank. But basically speaking, once all these countries came off the gold standard, there wasn't any limit to how much money the governments could create. And here in America, since 1980, the government has expanded the money supply 300%. But the country's only grown like 25 to 30% in that period of time. And so when you have a situation that the people that control all of the activity inside the circle can literally print money, you can see how there's a lot of money out there that really doesn't have any value at all. It's just a matter of everybody believing in it. And the banking system, everybody's got to believe in it. And that's why the common man never gets any of the information. They only get little bits of the information, because if anybody actually told you what was actually going on, you'd freak out and you'd go get your money back. As you look at that, you can see that like personal debt has expanded to the point where like the average person owes like 1.5 years' wages. You know, corporate debt is 50% of assets. The governments are running trillions of dollars worth of deficits. The trade figures are incredibly imbalanced, where it's costing billions and billions of dollars every month, you know, more than they're actually taking in. And you can see that all of this is creating a strain on the financial resources, not only of America, but all of the trading nations of the world.